All right, so let's come on to the Cumroglyphics book.
Right.
So, as you say, this is an incredible discovery, which I did see that you were on, is it S4C?
Yes, S4C.
So that's mainstream TV, isn't it?
Yeah, Channel Pedrolec, the Welsh language station.
So how did
I don't know if someone junior got their knuckles wrapped for showing that, but they did a very good treatment of it, I have to say. It's really well presented, very fair.
Right. So let me just give my own potted understanding of this, right?
Yeah, go on.
I don't want to steal it from you.
No,
so it's not my discovery.
It's not my discovery either.
Hieroglyphics consist of a load of pictures.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the picture, you state what that picture is of. So it might be a dog, it might be a shoe, or whatever it is.
Yes.
You take that word, you then find the Welsh word for what that means.
Yes.
And it will often have another meaning, because Welsh words often have two meanings, and you take the other meaning, and that is what that word is, which you can then translate into English.
Yes.
Some of the words are just the picture is a syllable, so it might be two pictures. You take the picture, you say what it is, you convert it to Welsh. You take the other picture, you do the same. There might be another word that means the same. You put them together, and it makes a new word. And the actual symbols, so it might be a lion and a whatever, a sword or something like that.
Yep.
It doesn't have anything to do with them. It's just a way of verbalizing the word. So that's how come the academics haven't discovered that? So just show us some examples.
All right. Well, the reason is they won't consider the Welsh language, because I think politically, if you say Cymraeg goes all the way back to Egypt, you've got to explain them like how the language moved, haven't you?
So the only way you can interpret these hieroglyphs in Egypt is by using the Welsh language. That's what you're
the amazing thing is that...
Now, why is, just before we go on, because a lot of people will laugh at that. They'll say, bloody hell, everything's Welsh. Everything's got to be Welsh, right? Why is it that it's the Welsh language that you need in order to interpret the symbols in hieroglyphs?
Right.
Why is that?
Excellent question. That's the core of all of it, yes.
Right.
I think for a lot of people, it's easier to think of it as Cymraeg is a descendant of ancient Assyrian. Mm-hmm. I get a bit freaked out, this idea of these blokes building the pyramids chatting in Welsh and stuff. But if you think of it, Cymraeg is a very ancient language. Mm-hmm. And the main words and the main roots of the words have stayed consistent all the way through that time, right? A T is still a house, the basic words have stayed the same. Now, if you look back at the work they were doing into languages and everything back in the 1840s, by the way, this was first thought of in the 1790s. There were published papers in the 1790s showing how strange it is that the syntax of hieroglyphs seems to be the same as Welsh. They seem to have 7 vowels, and so does Welsh. They were spotting similarities. Mm. And then in the 1840s, this really took hold. And you've got people like von Bunsen, who was a Prussian academic. What his theory was that all these languages, or most, not all languages, but a lot of the Western languages have a shared source. There was one original language which is spread out from there. And this makes a lot of sense from the evidence we have. For example, a lot of people are aware that Sanskrit has a lot of very similar words to Welsh, a lot of crossover. So some people say, therefore Welsh must come from Sanskrit. Well, I don't know how a language got from India to Wales. I don't know. I don't know how Welsh could have got to India either. But they could have a shared source. This is the thing. So the language has gone off to India, it's gone off to Wales, it's gone off to lots of other places. The difficulty is most countries, like English is a classic example. The English language, that's been beaten all over the place. It's so many foreign influences and migrations and invasions. It's very hard to work out the roots of English. Incidentally, there are a lot more Welsh words in English than people realise. I'll give one example in a moment. Make sure I remember to do it. Is that, so what we're looking at is really, Alan, with this wonderful word Alan uses, it's a living fossil, the Welsh language. It's a living fossil of how people spoke all that time ago. Because Wales has been stuck on the edge of Europe. It's never been really invaded. This thing about the Romans bringing all the words and all that is just they if anything, they would have an Etruscan language very similar anyway. Mm-hmm. The idea there's no word for a bridge or a door or a window until the Romans told us what they were is kind of a bit weird. Anyway, they would have had a similar root language as well. So we're not talking about borrowed words, or if they did, they borrowed the other way. So what happened there was fascinating, because there was huge academic opposition to this. You can imagine in the English senior levels, the Oxford and Cambridge, they were poo-pooing it, but the evidence was really strong. And this gained real momentum. This was really taking off in the 1880s, 1890s. This has been accepted. And in the end, they were forced to form a, what do they call it, a sort of academic research committee or some grand title they gave it, a working group, to look into this. So they got top academics at Oxford and Cambridge. They were researching it. Then they just delayed and delayed and delayed. And then World War I came along. And suddenly it just got forgotten. It just got forgotten, whether deliberately or accidentally. In World War I, a lot of things probably got forgotten. There's a harrowing experience. So if you went back to 1900, you would find this was on the academic agenda being discussed. World War I, it got swept under the carpet, and then it resurfaced again. There's Reg, I forgot his surname for a second. It's been revisited, so the 70s, and then the 80s, Wilson and Blackett, the first one. So well, let's just see if it works. No one had done that. It literally took them half an hour to see the first few words coming.
Right. So let's
go on.
give us a few examples, Ross, and give me the page reference number for your book so I can put that on the screen.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I can send you all the graphics too. Yeah, because the first thing is the one to start with is the easiest one in many ways is welcome. So welcome is a croeso in Welsh. Well, how do you draw welcome? How would you possibly draw welcome? I can't think of any way you can do it. Whereas croes and croeso, pretty much the same word, just an O on the end, is cross. So you see a cross, that cross means welcome.
So
it's that
a
simple.
cross in hieroglyphs means welcome. So
Yes.
you translate that to cross.
Yeah, so when you find that, you see welcome.
And then that means welcome.
Yeah, because one of the things I should
So-
explain as well is that one of the huge differences between this and the sort of consensus madness you've ended up with, this Egyptology, is that, Egypto-speak, whatever they call it, is they're under the impression that the symbols are letters, or that you need 4 or 5 hieroglyphs to make a word, whereas actually each hieroglyph is a word.
Yeah.
And like you said, your summary was excellent. Now and again you combine them.
Occasionally it's
Yes.
two pictures
Yes.
make one word. They are a syllable,
Yes.
but usually it's a word. So
Generally they're one word.
Give us some more examples. And
Well, a great example showing this idea of a duality and why you might use more than one hieroglyph sometimes is that you mentioned the goose, one of my favourite examples. So goose in Welsh is gwydd, and gwydd is also like knowledge. It's also gwyddo, I think, has become the word for like technology, and it's this kind of knowledge, and so it's quite an important word. So that's why goose would appear next to someone's name, and it always appears next to the sun. Now, in modern Welsh, we say rai for the sun, but that's a kind of modern corruption. If you look at the spelling, it's a ra. Rai is just the way you happen to pronouncing it these days for various reasons I won't go into now. But ra in Welsh is still the sun. It's amazing. After all these years, you've still got Ra, as in Ra, the sun god.
Yeah.
So Ra is the sun next to Gwydd. So you've got knowledge of the power, because Ra is the power. Ra Gwydd is the Lord. It's like in a church on a Sunday, you worship Ra Gwydd. That's the Lord. So you've got Ra Gwydd. So it's just so easy. I mean, your summary basically said it.
So give us some more
That's
examples
it.
of Egyptian symbols and what they then mean in Welsh and then in English.
Okay, well, another one of my favourites is this sort of semicircle shape. It's the flat bottom, a semicircle. And one thing I want to point out as well, this deciding what the hieroglyphs are and represent is not new. This is the bizarre thing about it. Still using the same, I don't know how, in fairness, I do not know how the mainstream academics worked out what these symbols were, because some are a little bit abstract.
Yeah.
Without knowing the language. It's remarkable. Like the one is like that shape, and they've worked out somehow that that's a cloak draped on the back of a chair, or draped somehow. Well, in Welsh, cloak is segan, and se is eternity. So you've got like this, a sense of established and eternal is the cloak. Another one they've worked out is the flat bottom of the semicircle. They've managed to work out that's a cake, right? And in Welsh, you got tish and lap, which looks exactly like that. And in the book, you'll see a picture of my wife making some tish and lap. Well, T is you are. So you got tish and lap. T, the T part is a significant part.
So what does that mean then?
T,
what's
you
the
are.
word?
You are. It's actually 2 words.
Right.
And then
You are. So if you see that in the hieroglyphs, it means you are.
yes,
Right. Okay.
you are. Simple
Can you
as that.
give us some
Well,
more?
it's a nice easy example then, which you see all over the place in hieroglyphs. You'll see a square. Sometimes it's more obvious it's a door. And now budge way back in the 1880s, and that worked out as a door, because in some you can actually see the like bars of wood, if you like. So it's a door. Well, in Welsh, we got drws is the normal word, but porth is the entrance. So you live near a place called Porth, because that's the entrance into South Wales. If you go down to Tiger Bay, it's Porth Tiger in Welsh. Porth is the entrance.
Right.
Well, por is the root word, so por is the power. So porti, power, you are the power. Because you have to remember the syntax, the word order in Welsh. So the example Alan always gives, in English you would say, you are a good boy. In Welsh you would say, there's a good boy, you are. The you are comes at the end of the sentence.
Yeah.
This is, and you can see this in the hieroglyphs. The
Yeah.
syntax works brilliantly. So
Yeah, I think it's the same in Hebrew. The order is different. It's just the same as Welsh.
Yeah, don't get on to Hebrew.
No? You
Well, we
Why
get
is
on to
that?
Hebrew.
Why is
No,
that?
I
But go on. Give me.
Hebrew's a resurrected language. It's not a
Right. Okay.
true
So
language, if you like.
convince everyone that these hieroglyphs, if you say them in Welsh, if you say what you see in Welsh,
Yeah.
and then convert it into English, then you can read that sentence.
Well, one of the
give us some more examples.
All right,
Ross.
then. Okay,
Go on.
yeah. Give you loads of examples. One of my favourites then is like this shape, 3 mountains, and you think, well, why would I have 3 mountains? What does that to do with? We look in the Welsh dictionary. 3 is tree, mynydd, Tremynydd is an explorer. And there it is.
Right.
So if you're trying to describe an explorer, you put Tremynydd. Oh, another of my favourites is you get these little snakes with a really exaggerated fork on their head. Right. So you've got the whatever snake that is, but it's the fork. Fork is the key.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're on the fork viper, isn't it? Fork viper. So the fork, forth. That's the way. So that's the way. So the example which is fascinating and what throws everything out, which is why I'm very loath to even mention it, is that they had no idea how to read these hieroglyphs. When you go back to the era of Champollion and these people, they were trying to work it out. We're back, because Napoleon, with a little bit background, 1790s, Napoleon has invaded Egypt. They've come across all this stuff. Europe has gone Egypt mad. You know, there's big exhibitions, there's hieroglyphs, they're carving, they're sawing off bits of, whole bits of hieroglyphs, and everyone's gone crazy about it. And a race was on. Who can translate it the first? So you've got, on the French corner, you've got Champollion, who has promised personally, Napoleon, I will translate this for you. And this has got him out of being an officer in the army. You've got to remember the carnage Napoleonic battles, right? So he's got a vested interest, and he's promised the emperor, and this will prove that the republics can outperform the old kingdoms, the old ancient regimes, So the British, the English, they put up their champion as Thomas Young, who was the genius of the day. He's the one who worked out how your eyes can see different colours and how to make safe gaslighting in London. He was the Mr. Go-To, absolute genius. There's lots of laws in medicine still named after him,
right?
Like working out dosages for children. So he was a genius. He worked out very quickly that you could not crack it without knowing the language. It's impossible.
The Welsh language.
Yeah. Well, he didn't know the language is the problem. Whatever language is behind,
right?
You need
the
to
language
know
that's behind the hieroglyphs.
You need to know it. Yes.
Which the most compatible language is Welsh.
Yes.
Right.
They guessed Ptolemy, all right?
Yeah.
So Ptolemy was the first one they guessed, and it's a complete guess. And they looked at it and they went, oh, hang on a second. We think Ptolemy is something to do with this. And they just did it by intuition and by deduction, guesswork. So they went, the little square, that makes a p sound. And the one I just told you about, porth, yeah. And then the little t sound, well, that's a t. And then they did, there's olives or a sling, depending on which way you want to read it, doesn't really matter. It works both ways. That's an o. And the lion must be a l. And he went through all of the name of Ptolemies. And this went down the wrong cul-de-sac because they thought they were letters.
Right.
Now what's happened in this situation, I can give you the sentence a second.
Each image was just a letter, so you need quite a few pictures in order to make a word.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But you've actually got a sentence there in your opinion.
Because the problem you got is Ptolemies was Greek. This is after Alexander died. You've got the takeover of the Demotri. Where this is a Greek name, which does not translate well into hieroglyphs. So what they've done, they've tried to pick words which describe the person, so you can read the sentence about Ptolemies. You're the powerful one, and you of this great wealth. You bring the country certain forever. Ptolemies. That's a sentence. and you can, it's like an acronym, like NATO or NASA or something. If you use the first syllable, you can make the name. So it's a really clever way of doing his name, but it only applies when you're doing these Greek names.
Right.
The rest of the time, they don't use that system. And this is what Thomas Young, the genius, worked out. He said, no, whatever's going on in there doesn't work on the outside. It cannot possibly work. There's a different system. But Champollion said, yes, there was. And I get to, so the key one, he said, I reckon it's the same system everywhere, and it must predate the Greeks. And then he found the hieroglyph for Ramesses. And this is the one, I'll tell you the secret, the sentence, right? I'm not avoiding it. Is that Ramesses, he predates the Greeks. So this is when Champollion had this great, I've discovered it moment, you know, and he ran out and he ran down to the local thing and said, there's Ramesses. I won the argument with Thomas Young. It's a classic false dichotomy. Right. The answer translated anything at all, but what he's trying to say is that because Ramesses has got those, remember I told the cloaks at the end? So that's Sir in Welsh, the eternal one, right? Right. It's the same as on the end of Ptolemy's. He's like, look, you can see the same thing happening. You've got the sun, that's Ra. So he's on the right coast. He's like, yeah, it is Ra. You ignore the line, which is a shame, because the line represents the place in Welsh, Ma. So you've got Ra, Ma. So now the problem is, because he's ignored that, he's looking at the vegetables, thinking that must be, he's looking, sorry, hang on, so you've got Ra, he thinks that must be an M, and it looks a bit like an M. So we'll go with that being M. And this is the disaster, because that isn't M, that's the part. That's the vinnen, that's vegetables. You can see the little potatoes or whatever growing under the ground. Right. And then you've got the Circe at the end. So what you got in the book then, you've got what it is. So the sun, the power, Ra. Then you've got the line showing it's a place. You can't just ignore that line. It means there's the power of this place. And then you've got the string of vegetables, the vinnen, which gives us the air, which is order. And then the Se, remember Se is the eternal. Right. So, interesting thing with, whenever there's two of something, if you look at Welsh counting, very similar to French, incidentally. So you have un, dwy, tri. Well, dwy, do, is God. So dwy and do, phonetically, are the same. Right. So whenever you see two of something, that represents God. Same with French, if you think, right? Un, deux, trois, and Dieu is God. Right. Which is an interesting coincidence, or maybe something connected.
So that this word here, or this sentence, that's a sentence in hieroglyphs, yeah?
Yeah, you can read the sentence.
Right, so we've got a bird, we've got like a curly E, we've got a half a circle, a triangle, a lemon shape, a hand and another lemon shape. Yes. So just go through that word there then, or that sentence. Okay. Well, so there's a bird there, so what's the English word?
Right, well the first thing is, well, you've got adar or der in there, so you get the adar, which is to reassert. Now what I've noticed is that, for a start, you'll see that the animals or birds, or usually the hands as well, point to the start of the word. Because sometimes it goes left to right, sometimes it goes right to left. So you just look where the bird's pointing or the animal's pointing. So you can see the bird comes first. And what you'll notice when you read lots and lots of hieroglyphs, which is quite easy to do once you understand how it works, it's almost like a full stop in reverse. That bird shows the start of a sentence. Right. Now, some of these sentences, the problem is using these, the cartouches they're called, and they're thought to always mean names, which I'm not even sure that's correct either, because anyway, that's another topic, is that they are extreme examples, and the sentences look really clumsy. The sentences aren't great, because what someone's had to do is create an acronym to sound the word. So if I said to you NATO, you've got to think of 4 words that begin with N-A-T-O. Right. You know, you might come up with all sorts. So the sentences can look a bit clumsy, but that's because these are Greek names. And it's trying to force a foreign language. And a great example of that, I'll also show you a picture, is that one of my favourite ones that really gives support for it being Welsh is there's no X, and there's no X in Welsh. Right. So if you look at the cartouche, or the spelling of Alexandra, or Alexander, sorry, as Alexander the Great, there's no X in it because they didn't have an X. So what they've done, same as we do in Welsh, they put the letter C and the letter S next to the two sounds. So it's Alex. So if you go to Wales and you look for a sign for a taxi, you'll see it spelled in Welsh T-A-C-S-I, because there's no X. So you can see the same thing when they describe an Alexander. Another great one is the, by the way, the lemon shape you talk about is the mouth. It's a mouth.
That's a mouth,
It looks like a lemon, yes. So you've got roch, which is to proclaim. The water's brilliant, because you still see this used on signs in Wales. It's amazing. This hieroglyph still exists, because although it looks like water, it actually represents swimming or floating. Novio. There's a bit of genius by Wilson and Blackett, and you still see swimming pools with this and Novio written next to it. And I've done some real fun ones in here with popular names, like how you would do David Beckham and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Because I want to make it clear to people, they are not really good sentences. The better sentences are read in the general text. But the reason the cartouche is so important is because that's where the whole of Egyptology started. They started guessing the names and then making some really bad guesses. And for example, one of the biggest disasters, two big disasters, one, Champollion ended up with RMSS for Ramesses, because he thought that's an R, that's an M, an S, an S. He missed out the space, the place. So he's looked at it and gone, RMSS must be Ramesses. Therefore, the Egyptians didn't use vowels. He's just, Alexandros starts with a blinking vowel, starts with an A. You go online, go on YouTube or something, you say how to read hieroglyphics. Say, there are no vowels in hieroglyphs. And the first thing we're going to teach you is how to draw the letter A. They'll do that straight up. So what he's done by that, and this comes back to your comment about Hebrew, which I don't want to get too much into right now, but this idea of there only being consonants and no vowels is not correct, because it's Ra. The vowel it's a sound, it's Ra. And it's Ma for place. And it's Sir for the cloak. The vowels are included.
So and there's a vowel and a consonant in the symbol.
But if the symbol doesn't include a vowel, then you have to add a vowel in. And you can see loads of examples where they add the vowel in. And without labouring the point too much, you see certain names, cartouches, they're not always exactly the same. There's variations. So sometimes with Alexander, because the second symbol is the lion, Cleo, so it's Alexandra, they've had to try and wobble it a bit. Well, the le, you don't need to put an E in, but sometimes they do. Sometimes they do put the corn sheaf, which is er, which is the E sound they want. So a priest in one place has gone, I'll spell it like this, because he says Alexandra, and the other one's gone, well, means he is. So it doesn't change anything. I can drop the he is in. So if I'm reading the sentence, it's like the great one he is and all this kind of stuff. And the other one just says the great one, blah, 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 So the variations work brilliantly, and to my mind actually explain how it works better,
So, assuming this work is correct, it means that the civilization that wrote the hieroglyphs were speaking in tongue in a very similar language to Welsh. But at that time in ancient Egypt, obviously they did not use the English alphabet. So when the people who spoke this language migrated to Britain, they brought the language with them, and only some time later in Britain was the English alphabet then used to try and spell the words of the Welsh language. This makes sense to me because there are sounds in Welsh that there are no letters for. So the hl sound in Llantrisant, spelt with two L's, or the use of the letter Y as a vowel, the sound. I think this is why, if you're English like me, the written Welsh language seems perplexing. It's trying to use an alphabet that wasn't designed for the language. So just to recap, the book by Wilson and Blackett, Moses and the Hieroglyphs, it takes the techniques that you've described in this book, and it interprets them, and it spells out what those hieroglyphs are saying, and then it derives the history from that. Right. All right. Well, if you're interested in Ross's book, you can get it from your website.
Cymroglyphics. Go to cymroglyphics.com or
and also the Moses and the Hieroglyphs.
Now,
we've been going for quite some time now.
We've
still got stuff to cover.
You can see I can fill a 2-hour show every Sunday.
Easily, So let's just...
can I do one word? Sorry, one word. I'm just going to jump in. So I know you want to
go
move
on.
Then, yeah. Just to give an example of where there's lots of Welsh words in English, which you wouldn't expect. Now, one of the people editing this, I've got to thank Paul Hartell, my editor over in America. He's Germanic background. He's in America. No interest in promoting Welsh, but he's a great editor, and he volunteered to edit the book, to make it read well and all that kind of thing. And one of the things he pointed out, well, how can mattress be an ancient Egyptian word or a Welsh word? Mattress, the springy things you sleep on at night. Well, if you look at the breakdown of that, you've got mar again, that place.
Right.
And trusu is the old Welsh verb to spread out.
Right.
So before you go to sleep, you spread out a place to lie on. That's matras. So there's lots of words in English which actually have a Welsh origin, and everyone assumes The words have been borrowed from English into Welsh.
Right, so what would that be in hieroglyphs then?
Oh, so matras.
Mattress.
Yeah.
What
So-
is ma and what is
Well,
truss?
mattress is a symbol. So you get a ma. It's like
Right.
a curl. I know it's a mattress. It's like a curled up mattress.
Right.
So from that we get ma, we get the place. So sometimes you use a
So
mattress.
draw the hieroglyph there then.
Well, it's just that.
Right, and just that means
Yeah.
mattress.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right. Right. Let's mention now. In Wilson and Blackett's work,
Yes.
they refer to star mounds.
Ah, yes,
Okay.
yes.
So there are ancient mounds all over the place. They're often referred to as burial mounds, or sometimes they'll say it's a mound being built by Normans to put a fort on there.
Mott and Bailey, yeah.
Mott and Bailey, right? Now, often there's little evidence that it was a burial mound. It's been assumed to be a burial mound. In other words, they've not always found bodies or bones in there.
No.
And the same applies with some of the fort. There's no evidence that there's no wood left over from the fort
that's
or
right,
whatever. So now, in some occasions, possibly they're not forts and they're not burial mounds, but they're built as a star mound. So just explain what that means, Ross.
Right, okay, yeah. Well, the one book which I haven't included on the list as physical copies now is Discovery of the Ark of the Covenant, which I'm making available as a download PDF. You can buy copies. I'll be careful what I say here for legal reasons, but there's someone publishing it and collecting the revenue and not giving anything back to Wilson and Blackett, is fair to say.
All right.
So you can buy it. And to be honest, the book they produce is well produced and it's reasonably priced. There's no point in me producing it as well. You can get holds of it, and I've got the PDF as well. And what they show in there, this is getting to a whole another massive area, which I'll try and make as concise as I possibly can, because it shows reflections with ancient Babylon and Britain. And this goes on this principle of as above, so below. It's like the 4 quarters of Wales and the 4 quarters of Ireland. You notice things, you may have observed this, that for example, if you look at Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England, if you divide it into 4 corners, Ireland's most obvious example to use. The northeast is like the sort of military area, it's around Belfast and all those sort of unfortunate things. Northwest is the more spiritual, that kind of mythical and that kind of area. Then the southwest is the farming area, that's your yeoman, and the southeast is your capital and your main centres of commerce. It's the same in Wales, Cardiff in the southeast, Dyfed southwest, you got the Gwynedd with all the mountains and the dragons and all that, and the northeast is where all the fighting takes place. Same, you can draw a similar thing with England and all sorts.
So the theory is that this started in Babylonia, that they would divide their lands up into areas for different functions, if you like. And that still applies
bizarre,
today.
Isn't it? It's amazing, isn't it?
Right.
And you have the 5th one in the middle then, which is the sort of where everyone comes together. There's Gudwerthion, I think, in Welsh, and I think got Meath or somewhere in the middle of Ireland. And you can do all these things. That's another subject. But what they also seem to have done, why is a wonderful thing, but you can only conjecture really, was to have as above, so below. So you would map out the stars onto your land. And we've found examples of this in various places. There's Hugh Evans has written a wonderful book showing how the mountains of Gwynedd conform to this. So that might be the first one, because you can't really move mountains around. So that would probably be first, because the mountains match. You can look at all the star constellations, and that's a whole, again, another massive subject. This is why you just can't cover everything. In southeast Wales, the mountains don't match exactly, so they seem to have created these mounds. And some are, like you said, being used as burial mounds. It might even be the case that some have been used as Norman Mott and Bailey castles. Why not? If you want to build a castle and there's a ready built mound, why wouldn't you use it?
Yeah.
But there's no evidence for that having taken place.
Yeah.
No. So the idea is then, so you can plot, heaven knows how they worked it out, the mounds to match the stars. And in some places, like in southwest Wales, they've used cromlechs, piles of stones or large stones, and they tell a star story.
All right. So just to recap, if you get a Google Earth map and you plot where these mounds are, it will map out a known star constellation.
Yes.
Right. So that the mounds were possibly built to revere the heavens. and you know, your wife
Andrew,
came up
yeah.
with a good suggestion, was
Yes.
that she thought that if you haven't got a map in your pocket, and there's a mound there and a mound there, it's providing you look at the sky and you've got a map of the ground.
Yeah,
So-
yeah.
so,
It's even better than that, yeah, because the work with Steve Willits is doing as well is that the place
Yeah.
names.
So,
We'll
so this
tell
is
you.
so
Yeah,
Steve Willits is another researcher that you're working with.
Yeah, he's doing some fantastic stuff. Yes.
on a book, and this is his map of South Wales,
Yes.
and on it is a map of
Yes.
the star constellations, and he's lining up various mounds with various stars.
And the place names. This
And-
is
yeah.
crucial. This is crucial. Like, why would you suddenly find... Because he's showing, he goes right back to ancient Babylon. Because the other thing you have to remember as well is ancient Babylonian zodiacs, which is like the Egyptian zodiac, as opposed to the modern Greek zodiac. So you have to be
Yeah.
a little bit careful.
Yeah.
But like, why would you suddenly have a farm halfway up a hill called Left Shoulder Farm? You got things like this. The place names are absolutely key. This is why it's so important that we protect our place names. They don't get changed to Dunroman or whatever, because you can follow the whole story. And like where you are, Merthyr, well, everyone's taught that means the martyr. You know, Merthyr means martyr, and it's to do with she was there and there's a raid and she prayed and they cut red off, whatever. Anyway, this is the story, right? But curiously, what Steve found, Merthyr could actually be a corruption of Mercha. And Mercha, then suddenly you're into astronomical stuff then. And if you look around this area, you'll find lots of places with names all connected to the same planet.
Yeah.
And what Steve's doing, amazing research, is following all the star and finding loads and loads of place names of villages, farms, hills, fields, give more supporting evidence.
Yeah, because you've got modern day naming of stars, right? And then you've got the Romans had a different set of names for the stars. That star, it's not the pole star, it's something else.
That's right.
And then if you go further back in time to Babylonian, they named their stars with different words.
Yes.
And if you translate that into, you might find that it's the same name as the mound in Welsh.
Correct.
So I mean, I don't know, I've not looked at any of that.
How on earth that could happen? I mean, it just freaks you.
Yeah.
Try and think about it.
Right. So if you get all of the stars, you convert them to the oldest sort of Babylonian words for that star, and then look for those place names of the mounds. That's essentially
That's what he's doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's remarkable is it's working out all over South Wales. And one of the things, this is further. This is what I'm trying to show. This is a living subject. This is further than Wilson and Blackett went. Because what we're discovering is you can actually follow things like the story of Gilgamesh through the place names. Like where we went to Garth, for example. Well, Garth is Welsh for battlements. Well, if you look at ancient Uruk, that's also the word for battlements. And on the top of Penarth, you've got Pen Turch. So you've got Pen Turch, Uruk, which is the capital, the head of Uruk. And then you can follow the place names. It might seem a stretch on its own. Then just down, Steve's found all this. Just from there's a place called Henstaff, the old staff. Doesn't make any sense. You look at a Babylonian star map, and you see the guy with the staff, everything going around it, just below where the Uruk thing, and it's like, and then you got the Caerphilly. Philly, it fits on where the stag should be. And in Old Welsh, Philly is the stag. It's everywhere.
Yeah,
it's everywhere.
And the shoulder that you mentioned earlier is part of what?
Oh, that's Tiamat, the ancient Babylonian goddess or god Tiamat, who fights the original origin stuff. We're going right back to Gilgamesh and all that kind of really early Babylonian stories, and you can piece together all her body. There's the left shoulder, and then
so this farm, which is called Left Shoulder Farm.
Yeah.
It's actually there's a set of mounds.
Yeah,
somewhere,
you plotted out, and there's Tiamat.
Which is the star constellation.
Yeah, the head, the foot,
and that's why that farm's called.
Yeah.
Even though they don't know why the farm is called that. Yeah.
No, and it gets even better because then you've got the Tiamat had the sacred tablets, the secret of life. Whoever holds the tablets controls everything. And you've got there the field of the tablet. Then across the other side, you've got the Garden of Eden, and it's just a grotty hill.
Right.
So it's a huge. We need more people researching that because it's so vast.
Yeah, I did. When I interviewed Alan Wilson, he did pull out this big star map.
And, the famous clip.
I didn't realise how important that was.
Yes,
It was a big drawing of Glamorgan, I guess, with various...
A bit bigger than that, yeah.
Various
mounts.
mounts.
Yeah, up towards the beacons, yes.
Right,
yes.
various mounds on there. And I just filmed it. But apparently, people have been freezing that, trying to get the... But he's given you all that research.
Yes, yes. I've got that map now, yes, as well. So I'm trying to make all this available as quick as I can.
Right.
So other people can do research as well, because his approach is different to Steve's, because he's on a different line of research. Now, one of the key things, this is an issue that's gone at the moment, rather tragically, is that there's...
so Steve Willits.
Yes, Steve Willits. Yeah, he's great to talk to as well, and I have him on my show a few times. And there's you go up on St Gennydd Common, up by Eglwys Common. It seems to have two names. What Alan Wilson discovered there was that they've got the rocks and everything, stones, are arranged. It's almost like a classroom. This is a mini version of it. And if you stand in the right place, you can follow the stones in different directions, and they'll point you to different stars. That would be where you'd learn your craft. And the tragedy is, at the moment, they want to put a wind farm up there, or an electricity generator. And those stones can all get moved or ruined or destroyed or something. So it gets a little bit complicated, because you seem to have more than one star map. I mean, we're talking about thousands of years here. So for whatever reasons they've done you can find more than one. So that's what I think has confused researchers. Yeah,
I mean, this is another thing. We're going back thousands of years from Arthur, really, to this stuff, aren't we? The mounds.
I would think so, though. I wonder how much of it was... I don't know how old they are. I mean, they might have still been building these things in Arthur's time. Let's say one thing on the map you mentioned, when Angela was saying about a map, it's the most brilliant mapping system. It's like having GPS on your phone. Because if I turn up and I say, well, where am I? Oh, this is Left Shoulder Farm. And if you know your astronomy, you look up and go, there's a left shoulder. I'm actually trying to get to the ferocious warrior. Where's the other star you know? Well, that's such and such star. Oh, okay, I need to go that way.
Yeah.
You know, it works brilliantly.
Yeah.
Now, like GPS.
Now, on Steve Willits' map, he's got Orion, but you think that there was maybe different eras where they were building these mounds to revere the heavens, and that there's another Orion in a different place to where he's placed it. So I asked Ross if he would take me to all of the mounds of the Orion constellation. So we've been out and we filmed at each of the mounds. So I've set him a challenge to... Well, what we're going to do is we're going to draw on a Google map, well, it doesn't have to be Google, on a map where we visited, each of the mounds that we filmed, and then we're going to overlay the Orion star constellation and just see how close.
Let's see how close that comes out.
Now, just to add that it's not perfect, is it? Because maybe they couldn't build a mound in a particular place for a particular reason.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're at a site now which is undisputably a mound, as we see by the road sign, West Mount Crescent. So tell us where we are, Ross, and tell us a little bit about this mound and how it may fit into the Orion theory.
Well, this is Tonteg, which is this is the place I spent most of my childhood, and amazingly I used to play on this mound.
So clearly when they've built this housing estate, they've felt that this mound is important enough to put a fence around it and protect it, because it hasn't been built on. So officially it is some sort of archaeology, but it's classed as Norman. Is that right, Ross?
Yeah, well, that's the way it is in Wales. Nothing's ever Welsh. So this is classed officially as Norman Mott and Bailey Castle. And if you read the information board he put up recently, explains there how this has been preserved. It gives us great insight into medieval building and whatever. But it's not a great argument. Now, the first thing I would say is, if there ever was a Norman fort on there, it doesn't change that it might be in an earlier mound. So that's the first thing to get on the record. They can reuse the mound. If you're going to put a castle somewhere, stick it on an existing mound. But the problem is, if you look at it, militarily it's a disaster, because you've got the hill's very close to it. We could just sort of lob stuff in from no distance. The size of it doesn't work. It's just not a very defensible position. And most tellingly, there's no archaeological evidence at all. Nothing has been found from there, not a pot or an arrowhead. No signs have been lived on. So it seems a real stretch, but it's a really convenient label that seems to be put on most of the star mounds and burial mounds.
Right, so I'm standing on the mound now that we were just looking at, and over Ross's shoulder you can probably see one of the Orion mounds, of which there are 3. That's Orion's belt. So just tell us a bit more about that, Ross.
Yeah, so the amazing thing is, coming here all my life and everything, you don't see them till you point them out, but you can see clearly there's 3 mounds in a row, and there were 2 other mounds as well, which makes the full 5, but they're the 3 prominent ones that matter. And if those trees weren't there, you could probably just about see Castle Cork.
We're at another location now which isn't publicly known as a mound, but may have been a mound before this castle was placed on it, Ross.
But we have to remember, this is like a folly. This is built in the sort of 1870s. It's not even 200 years old, this castle. Now there is some evidence of medieval dungeons and structures like that, but the mound does seem to be potentially a lot older. And Richard's brought us around the back, where we don't normally go as tourists. I don't really look at this part. And you can certainly see this shape certainly has that mound type shape which has been bricked over. So who knows? What would be wonderful to find if we could would be some pictures of this before they rebuilt the castle. That would give us a lot of clues. That would be really helpful.
We're at another mound now, and
what's interesting up there as well, we notice the mound, it's not the whole hill, if you like, it's the mound is clearly a different bit on the top of the hill, which is the mound.
Right, we're at another mound in the same region, and what's interesting about this mound is it wasn't discovered until fairly recently, or that you know of, Ross.
Yeah, this doesn't seem to be in any of Wilson and Blackett's books or anything. And Len Crowther, who's fantastic, old fella who knows Alan Wilson from way back in the day, back in the 80s. He's a Cardiff boy, but he moved up to this area and he used to have horses, and he'd come up this hill to get hay. And he'd noticed this over the years, he'd noticed this mound. There are also standing stones which the farmer seems to have just dragged off in the last maybe 10 years and piled up. But the mound, that's how he spotted it. So top marks to Len.
We're on top of the mound that Len told you about.
Yeah, that's right, Len's mound, yeah.
And again, we can see Garth Mountain in the backdrop there, Ross.
Yeah, and amazingly, if you look, you'll see there's a hole in the wall, which Len spotted, and if you line up with a hole in the wall, that points you towards the Garth. Now, I think the wall's a lot more recent, but it's curious that it's there, isn't it?
We've moved to another mound location now, and it's just behind Pugh's Garden Centre in Morganstown. Now, it doesn't look much at all. I was here about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was fenced off. The mound was fenced off, and you could actually see the mound, but now it's all overgrown, so we can't really get much on camera. But do you want to tell us what you know about this mound, Ross?
Well, as you say, I mean, it's obliterated really at the moment. It's chest-high brambles. I'll come back in the winter and have another look. The trees, the problem with the trees as well is that you always realise is the roots destroy any chance of any future archaeology or exploration of the site. They claim to be protecting it. It's got protected signs and it's scheduled signs. It's recognised by CADU and all the authorities. This is not protecting a site. Just putting trees in it and destroying the site. It's now almost invisible. And by the time those trees come down, that'll be gone. And it's been there for who knows how long, 1,000, 2,000 years, maybe longer. Could be even older than that. It's heartbreaking. If you don't get some recognition of these sites, they're all going to go the same way. And that's it. It gets harder every year.
Okay, so here is a map showing where we visited, and the red dots represent the mounds. I'm just going to move the map to one side. Then I'm going to remove the map itself, leaving just the mound layout. We see the red dots. Now let's put the Orion star constellation next to it. I tried to match the two up, but without much success. So I decided to look up the claim in Wilson and Blackett's book, Discovery of the Ark. Here's what it says. There is a very large mound at Morganstown on the east side of the Garth, which would mirror the large star Bellatrix in Orion's left shoulder. And yet other mounds at Whitchurch, just inside Cardiff's north boundary, is precisely where the very bright Betelgeuse in Orion's right shoulder should be. Then there is a very large mound at Castle Monarch that was first thought to be set for the bright Bellatrix in Orion's left shoulder, but which might be for Aldebaran. On the west side of the Garth there is another huge mound placed for the bright star Saiph at Tonteg, and yet another huge mound for the brilliant star Rigel at Toyn Miser Grug, or the Field of the Heap. So what I have done is taken two of the mounds named in this passage, Morganstown and Tonteg, and lined them up with Bellatrix and Saiph. And here is what we get. We see that Orion's belt isn't closely aligned, and the other mounds we visited don't seem to be connected. If we look at the other two major stars, Rigel and Betelgeuse, we can use the map to guess where they might be. I had a look on Google Earth at the location where Rigel ought to be, and I did find what looks like a mound. We see it here. Betelgeuse ought to be at a place called Rupina Hill, or Rhubarb Hill, which is covered in trees, so perhaps there is a mound underneath there somewhere. This exercise is interesting, but for me it hasn't really proved much. So in order to get more information, I asked Ross if I could speak to Steve Willits, who has done a lot more research into this subject. I'm pleased to be joined by Steve Willits. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Now, as you saw, we couldn't get Orion to line up with the mounds. Now, you've been researching this subject for 3 years now.
For 3 years, yes.
And you yourself started looking at Wilson and Blackett's work. And I believe that you tried to do an exercise similar to what Ross and I did.
Yeah.
And you had similar problems. So can you just explain that first?
Now, what I got is just like a planisphere, just a map of the stars. And every time I placed that on that central belt of Orion, I could never get anything to work. Even if you turn it upside down, it doesn't work. And I think I tried it maybe 40, 50 times in different ways. Just putting it on the Garth mountain, but at different angles. Right. Maybe they just used the Garth and put the 3 mounds there, but at the wrong angle. So I was trying to twist it, turn it, but still keeping those 3 stars on that mountain. Nothing worked. Absolutely nothing. I couldn't get it to work. So what I started doing, and I thought, well, I'm going to see if I can work it up myself. So I basically started translating all the place names, and not just in that area. I mean, the whole of Southeast Wales, trying to get clues of, where would Gemini be, where would Cassiopeia be, see if you can get any clues. So as I was starting to translate all these names, you'd pick up the odd name and think, oh, right, that could be Scorpius. So you think, right, that's Scorpius up there, Orion's down there, put the planisphere over, see what it looks like, see if any mounds match up. If they don't, then move it and then translate again. And I think I spent maybe 2 years subtly adjusting it bit by bit, constantly adjusting, then translating the names. If that doesn't work, move it again, see if this lay on mounds, translate the names, until I eventually got the whole thing to work.
Right. So just to interrupt you there, Steve, when you say names, so you're looking at the oldest Welsh names that you can find for the geography.
That's
including some of the names of the mounds.
Yeah.
And you're comparing that with what?
Right.
Star constellations, but the oldest names. So
yeah, so these would be Babylonian star constellations.
Right.
Like Wilson and Blackett said, ignore the Roman, ignore the Greek. I went back to Babylonians. That because they did say that they brought, when Alpine came here, they brought their Chaldean culture with them, and the Chaldeans were from Babylonia. So I thought, well, maybe that's where I should start. Mm-hmm. So I started looking at some of the old stories, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, and those types of stories, and you could start to see clues in there, and you think, oh, right, maybe it is Babylonian. And then there was another fantastic book which came out, I think, at the same time, the same year, or the year after Wilson and Blackett released Ark of the Covenant, which was Babylonia's Star Lore by Gavin White. And he went through the book, the whole Babylonian Star Lore, like a compendium. So he gave all the attributes, all what he thinks all these different characters, all these gods, all these constellations represent.
So he's catalogued the Babylonian naming of stars?
Basically, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was a godsend. It was written in not academic sort of literature, which can be difficult to interpret sometimes.
Right.
So you look at it and you go, right. And the first one I looked at was the wolf, constellation of the wolf. Where in Babylonia, all large carnivores were classed as ferocious warriors, for example. So the Wilson and Barker identified a mound called Tower the Bloodhead, which means the ferocious warrior or the fierce fighter. But then if you know that the fierce fighter or ferocious warrior is a wolf, and Bloodhead means also wolf-like, you then got one of the constellations.
Right.
So it's like, all right, I've got one now.
So what's the place name, the modern day place name for that then?
No, it's the name of a mound, but it's near a little village of Manmoyle, near Penavon Pond.
Right.
So it's over Blackwood, Oakdale.
And what's the name of the mound?
Tywyn a Bloodhead,
Right.
which, like I said, means wolf-like. But it can also mean something like fierce fighter, ferocious warrior.
Right. And you've compiled quite a database now where you've matched a Babylonian naming of a star to some place or mound in Wales. Just tell us how many.
Right, and not every cairn or mound has got a name. So there are quite a few. So I got, I'm not sure how many, I guess say 20 with a name associated with it. There's another, say, 40, 50 where it doesn't have a name to the mound itself, but the names of the places around there match that mound, or what it should be.
Right.
So then you build them. I got maybe close to 100 of the stars.
Right. Right. And you've started mapping them out and comparing it in detail with the constellations.
That's it, yeah.
All right. So so from that research, Steve, you believe that that Orion is in a slightly different place to where we were trying to place it.
That's it, yeah. It's
So we'll just bring up this map now on the screen. I can put that on the screen now. And if you just talk us through your map, Steve, and just show us the overlay of Orion on the ground as well.
okay. Yeah, if you look, there's a figure on there, and if you look with this helmet, that's where the Garth Mountain is, and that's where the 3 mounds of Orion. So if you look where I've got them, it's actually below the Garth Mountain, very close to the M4. Now, in that location, some of it's built on. There's a railway line going through where I think one should be. There's a Henstaff Court is where another, and the other one I haven't been able to gain access to it. But all those 3 points are on local high points. So you got rounded 3 sort of little, slightly higher places in the surrounding area in the same position. Now you got also to identify them, you got 3 different names next to them. So the first star, Alnitak, for example, is called, not the mound itself, but there's a family called Gada Wen. Gada meaning chair or throne, and Wen can mean white or it can mean like a beautiful maiden from Gwen. So the next star, Alnilam, is hen staff, which means old staff. And the third one is Llwyn Ioli, which means something like, Ioli means something like to beg or to pray or to ask for some help then. So those 3 names are quite significant because they then match 3 characters in the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the attributes of 3 characters in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So what I think's happened is those 3 stars on the top of the mound, on top of the Garth Mountain, are actually representing these 3 characters on a high point, because this is lower down. And you'd also need to work out what the Garth Mountain is. Now, in Babylonian star lore, you got certain constellations are identified or associated with certain cities. Now, the true shepherd of Anu, which is the Babylonian name for this, the associated city is Uruk. So in the beginning of the Epic of Gilgamesh, it mentions that Uruk is the abode of Anu Ishtar, the place of Gilgamesh. So you've got 3 mounds up on what I believe represents, not is the actual city, because that's out in Iraq. This represents on the star mark the city of Uruk. So the 3 names next to these 3 stars in the belt of Orion below are attributes of certain characters. Like Gadawen, Ishtar, for example, planted a tree so she could build a chair out of it. So you got the chair. Gilgamesh was known as the shepherd of Uruk, and he's quite often seen with a staff in his hand. So you got the staff in the middle. And Gilgamesh was also terrorizing the city of Uruk, all the people. And then you got Ioli, which then means to beg, to pray, because the people were begging and praying to Anu. So those 3 mounds on the top of the garth represent these 3 characters, I believe, in the shape of the belt of Orion. But the belt of Orion on the star map is lower down.
Right.
Does that make?
Yeah, and what about the outlying stars? So you've got them marked on the map there.
You got them marked on the map. Right, the first one, which is Betelgeuse on the shoulder, on that location is a burial chamber. Now, what's significant about that star there is another guy, Hugh Evans, has written a book, The Star Map of Gwynedd. Now, he has Betelgeuse on Mynydd Rhyw Saeson. And right next to this star is Rhyw Saeson.
Right.
So you've got the same star, the same name in 2 different locations.
Right.
Rhyw Saeson, which I think is significant in itself.
Right.
Which then leads to the question, what does that name really mean? Below Betelgeuse then you got Safe. And right on target, as you can see, the planisphere is overlaid onto these dots. Right on target there, you've got a Mott. Now, which is just basically an earthen mound. Now, as far as Motts are concerned, there are a number which are marked as Motts. They may have been repurposed at some stage, but that could have originally been a star mound, because it's in the right location. So you got these 2, you got actually something far. Bellatrix, in that location, is Craiger Park, I think, is there, and there's a homestead right on location. How old that is, or whether or not it was a homestead, or whether or not there was something next to it, is unsure. But the name Craiger Park means the stone park, suggests it could be something there. I would need to get to that place to check, but that was right on location for that one. And you go Rigel at the bottom. Now that is right in the middle of a field, and there's, if you just look at normal maps, you can't see anything. But if you look at the LiDAR, you can just make out lumps and bumps under the ground. Right. This area is quite heavily farmed, so that could have quite easily been ploughed out.
Right.
But that's all I got to go for with that. It's just these, under the surface, you can just make out these lumps right on target.
Okay.
And then you've got Aldebaran then.
Which isn't part of Orion.
Which isn't part of Orion. Aldebaran, in the Babylonian terms, is the jaw of the bull of heaven.
Right.
And is part of Taurus.
Right.
And that is marked on then for the Mott in Morganstown.
Right.
So you got
the Mott that Ross and I visited in Morganstown was actually Aldebaran.
No, Aldebaran, yeah, yeah.
Oh right,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
yeah. Some people say,
yeah, that's it.
It has different pronunciations, yeah. Okay, now, so you've done this with all of the constellations.
With all of them, yes.
And you're working on it now, so you think that you may have your book ready within the next 6 months at some point?
Possibly sooner, but yeah, 6 months definitely, I would say, yes.
Right, all right. And if anyone who's interested, if they keep an eye on Ross's website, because Ross is going to help you publish it and contribute to it as well.
Yeah.
So I guess what you're intending to do is to provide details of this very interesting star mound map. And I think it's just a fascinating subject, and presumably the ancients, for some reason, when they came here, they wanted to record part of their history on the landscape.
On the landscape, yes.
Yeah, for whatever reason, and it's for some reason it's linked to the heavens.
And it's not just the stars are mapped out. That just provides a backdrop for all these sort of ancient stories that seem to be encoded in the landscape.
Right. All right, and Steve, it's fascinating stuff, and I really appreciate you coming in to explain all that. And we're going to go back to Ross now and just get a few finishing comments from him. And just to mention that, if you want to get in touch with Ross, get onto his YouTube channel, which is Britain's Hidden History, because you welcome chat in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, there's constant chat
to
going
keep it
on.
polite and family friendly. That's the only rules we have.
Yeah. And you've had information from people that you've then gone and investigated various sites that nobody knows about.
Yeah, I do a lot of that. Yeah, like Len Crowther. I want to give Len a mention because he's wonderful. I'm not sure how old he is, but he knew Alan Wilson back in the 80s, maybe even late 70s. Mm-hmm. And when Alan was helping organise the local rugby and that, he was trying to get Len to play. And he sort of took Len under his wing a bit, and one of Len's friends. We went to various historical locations, which Len says, at the time, he wasn't that bothered, but he always got a pint and a bag of crisps at the end of the trip. So he used to quite like going along. But Alan must have lit a flame because he's still interested now. Yeah. And in our local area, he showed me another mound. Perhaps we can show a clip of that. It was a few weeks ago, which I didn't know about. And that fills in one of the key gaps, if you like. Yeah, one of the stars on there. Right. So Len's still finding other stuff, and I've done a few trips with him. So that's the kind of thing I show on my channel. What I try and do is have, during the week, under 10 minutes, try and get down to 7 or 8 minutes almost every day. There's a little nugget, if you like. Mm-hmm. And then reports from on-site, and then the roundup and the news and the chat every Sunday. So it's quite a regime. Right. That's why it's not got the production values you have. Nothing as professional as this, I'm afraid.
I take my hat off to you that you're putting stuff out every single day. That would
most days, yeah.
Most days, and doing a weekly live show as well.
Yes,
so that's pretty commendable.
Thank you.
And again, if you want to get on Ross's channel, it's Britain's Hidden History. So hopefully you get a few more subscribers.
Yeah, brilliant.
There,
yes, please. Yeah,
is there anything else you want to add? We've covered a lot of ground.
We have covered a lot, haven't we? I mean, there is always more. I mean, it just goes on and on. I mean, some of the other. I'll just give a quick mention here. This is the book not by Wilson and Blackett we actually published. I give Robert Shaw a quick mention here because this is brilliant, and this is what excited me about this book. I've had to help with the editing and publishing of this book. Is originally it was just a story about why these churches, the places they are, and you can see the Eye of Horus and how the City of London works on Egyptian principles, which ties in with all the other stuff, which is pretty weird. What really jumped off the page of me, though, is, and I think people can associate with, is as recently as the 17th century, stories like the first history story most people are taught in school is the Great Fire of London. We're all taught, the Pudding Lane and the Baker and all this kind of stuff. Well, if you look into it, like Robert's done, all that's nonsense. The parliamentary report at the time completely exonerated the Baker, and that was a completely false story. And they actually captured arsonists, right? And they were French arsonists. And the person going around setting the arsonists free was the royalty. It was Charles and his younger brother, who was Duke of York, and New York is named after Jane. So they were.
So the Fire of London was a false flag organised by royalty. Yeah. Yes.
In short. But that gets you interested in it. What I'm trying to show to people is that this is quite recent, and you can see this. This ties in with a lot of your work without me getting myself into too much trouble here. Yeah. Not only was the fire organised, but so was the Great Plague of London, the wars with Holland, and the famine that followed. They were the 4 biblical retributions, the 4 rides of the apocalypse, that they were bringing because their father, Charles I, who they considered to be God on earth, if you like. So it's deicide. They killed the king. They killed the god. And the people of London needed punishing. And this is crucial era, that late 17th century, because this is when we had the coup in Britain, when the Stuarts, the ruling family, could trace its way back, was got rid of, were invaded by a foreign body under William of Orange. And ever since then, we've had foreign rulers with the real power being the city. Because it's only a few years after this, the Glorious Revolution in 1688, 6 years later is when the Bank of England was formed, the maritime law was brought in, all these things which are so causing so many problems now. Right. comes from that era as well, so it's interesting, worth reading.
Right, and you mentioned Charles there, so we now have a Charles III.
King Charles III.
So what, do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I was surprised he chose the name, because it was always used to be that he would choose something else, wasn't he? Because it's such an unlucky name.
What, Charles?
Yes, was rather unlucky, isn't he? If you look at Charles I,
Right.
got
So
his
you
head
think he was
cut.
going to change his name?
Well, most of them do, don't they, if you think
Right.
about it? I mean, what was it? The last king was Albert, was his name, wasn't it? But he became George VI, wasn't he?
Right, right.
They usually change. They have birth names they don't use. They use their
Right.
dynastic names. And Charles was, one of the rumours was he's going to go as Arthur, because that's his second name. Now, the thing with Charles, you see, Charles I,
What, Prince Charles is all?
Charles Arthur, yeah.
His second name is Arthur. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's in his names, isn't it? And all his sons have. So if Arthur's a myth, why have so many royals got Arthur in their name? That's we come on to the Adrian Gilbert stuff and things. But, so Charles I was the one who had his head chopped off at the end of the Civil War, as described in here. Charles II, his son, was most likely poisoned or murdered because he made a right mess of everything. So they didn't think they'd have another Charles as name for the king. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, God save the king and all that, you know. I'm trying to get over my trauma of the change of an epoch or whatever they've been described as, change of an era.
Yeah, I'm interested.
You're coping well, Richard, I have to say.
Well,
I've had to be recording this when the news is very fresh.
I'm interested to see what the coronation's going to look like, because if the ceremony is the same as they did in the 1950s,
yes,
it's just going to seem a bit ridiculous.
Yeah,
really.
I can't see why it wouldn't be.
Right. Yeah. Oh well,
we'll see. Because
I don't know when it is.
Everyone watching this will know we don't. So there we are.
Yeah. All right then, Ross. I really appreciate you coming in. And
man, thank you very much. I've got to say, this has been such a privilege and a dream to come on your show. I'm so excited, and there's so many people, myself included, who wouldn't know about any of this work, and I think this would have gone. This would have disappeared. One of the expressions I use is that back in the 80s, British history was hanging on by its fingernails, and Wilson and Blackett came and dragged it up to the top of this cliff, and it was starting to fall back in again, and we're here to try and save it, and you've been a big part of that, so thank you very much.
Well, ironically, it wasn't really the history that I was particularly interested in.
No, you was in the fire, weren't you?
Well, it was the fact that they were trying to kill them.
Yes.
Right? And do everything and destroy them.
Thanks.
That was what...
Well, for obvious reasons, I don't really like that part of the story.
No, but I mean, the history is clearly very important. As we have this, for whatever reason, they've been attacked so much, and we have discussed some of that. But like
one reason, if you're talking about change of new king, I mean, if you've got a situation where you've got a legitimate royal family that goes back to, say, 500 BC, well, that predates the Normans by 1,500 years, so you can understand why it's a political threat, can't you?
Absolutely. All right then, Ross, and believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.